Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you calling up my legislation, the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act. Iran is exporting around 1.5 million barrels of petroleum per day, its highest level in 4 years. Around 80% of those exports go to China, providing Tehran with revenues that keep the regime afloat and enable Iran's sponsorship of terrorism abroad. As we saw during the October 7th attack by Hamas against Israel, it is long overdue to cut off Iran's ability to finance terrorist proxies around the world. H.R. 5923 targets small, independent Chinese oil refiners, so-called teapots, which have been driving China's purchases of Iranian crude. Unlike state-owned refineries that have retreated from the market, teapots are less exposed to blocking sanctions and deal in more limited quantities. However, teapots aren't completely beyond our reach. The United States also wields secondary sanctions that punishes foreign financial institutions that work with Iran's banks in order to deal in Iranian crude. Under current law, these dealings can be sanctioned when a foreign bank engages in significant transactions. The modifier significant appears frequently in our sanctions law, and for good reason. It gives the Treasury Department appropriate discretion to go after meaningful trade and focuses its resources on the worst actors. But limiting ourselves to the big fish doesn't work when it comes to Iran's collaboration with teapot refiners. There are more than 40 such refiners, and they may not have economic ties to the U.S. that would make them wary of sanctions. This is where my bill comes in. Chinese and other foreign financial institutions that work with teapots do deal with the U.S. financial system. Therefore, my bill expands the law's definition of significant transaction to ensure that any dealings they have with Iran's sanctioned financial institutions, including the Iranian Central Bank, will lead to the closure of their correspondent accounts in our country. H.R. 5923 requires the Treasury Department to make annual sanctions determinations for Chinese banks. These banks will have to force the refiners to deal with the exit of the Iranian oil trade or risk losing their access to the U.S. dollar. These secondary sanctions complement the SHIP Act, a bill that I authored and recently passed through the House that would impose sanctions on ports and refineries that take in petroleum from Iran. I was pleased to see the House pass this bill with broad bipartisan support. Mr. Chairman, I believe the right strategy to confront Iran's petroleum exports needs to address China from two sides. We need to enforce primary sanctions against Chinese firms that trade in oil, but when they fly under the radar, we have to force China's own banks to cut them off. And that is what H.R. 5923 does. Iran remains classified as the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, and its longstanding support for Hamas must end. That means attacking Tehran's ability to leverage oil exports to obtain hard currency, period. H.R. 5923 underscores that we will target foreign entities, large and small, in pursuit of this objective. Mr. Chairman, I just came back from a bipartisan trip to Israel, and we met with Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant and the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew. We met with the families of the hostages of the terrorist attack on October 7th, and we watched a 21-minute version of the video that members of Congress were shown this morning in a classified setting. I don't know how anyone could watch that video and see the barbaric destruction that was ravaged against Israel and the Jewish people and not understand that we are dealing with evil that must be confronted and combated at every turn. Not only must Hamas be eliminated, but we must confront the unholy alliance between Iran, China, Russia, as they seek to undermine the free world, as they wage war in Ukraine against Israel. We cannot be a bunch of Neville Chamberlains. This moment calls for us to be Winston Churchill. Victory at all costs. I yield back.